The Hospital Nurse Who Changed Music History. Madrid, 1963. In the sterile corridors of the Clínica de la Concepción, a 20-year-old football player lay paralyzed from the waist down, his dreams shattered along with his spine. Julio Iglesias had lost everything: his career, his mobility, his future. But in that darkest moment, one woman's kindness would not only save his life, but change the course of music history forever. Her name was Eladio Magdaleno, though everyone called her Ella. She was 24 years old, a dedicated nurse who had seen countless patients come and go through the hospital's rehabilitation ward. But there was something different about the young man in room 237. Not just his devastating injuries, but the profound sadness that seemed to emanate from his very soul. Julio had been Spain's most promising young goalkeeper. Real Madrid had been watching him. His future seemed limitless until that fateful September night when his car skidded off a rain-slicked road near Madrid. The accident left him with a damaged spinal cord and doctors who whispered that he might never walk again. When I first saw him, he wasn't just physically broken, Ella recalled in a rare interview decades later. His spirit was crushed. He would stare at the ceiling for hours, refusing to speak to anyone. The other nurses were afraid of him, not because he was dangerous, but because his despair was so overwhelming. For weeks, Julio remained in this catatonic state. He refused physical therapy, barely ate, and showed no interest in the rehabilitation exercises that might help him regain some mobility. His family was devastated. His girlfriend had stopped visiting, and his football teammates had moved on with their lives. He was utterly alone. But Ella refused to give up on him. "I had lost my own brother in a motorcycle accident 2 years earlier," she explained. "I recognized that look in Julio's eyes. It was the same look my brother had before he died. Not from his injuries, but from losing hope. I couldn't let that happen again." Ella began spending extra time with Julio during her shifts. She would sit by his bedside during her breaks, talking to him even when he didn't respond. She told him about her life, her dreams of traveling the world, her love of music. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Julio began to listen. The breakthrough came on a rainy November evening. Ella was working the night shift when she heard something unusual coming from room 237. The sound of quiet sobbing. She found Julio crying for the first time since his accident, finally allowing himself to grieve for everything he had lost. "That's when I knew he was ready to fight," Ella said. Tears meant he was feeling again. And if he could feel pain, he could feel hope. The next day, Ella brought something that would change everything: a small acoustic guitar that belonged to her brother. "Music saved me when I lost him," she told Julio. "Maybe it can save you too." Julio stared at the instrument with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. He had never shown any interest in music before his accident. Football had been his entire world, but with nothing else to occupy his time and a growing desire to please the one person who still believed in him, he tentatively reached for the guitar. His first attempts were clumsy and frustrating. His fingers, weakened by months of inactivity, could barely form simple chords. But Ella was patient, encouraging him through every failed attempt, celebrating every small improvement. "She would sit with me for hours," Julio remembered years later. "When my fingers bled from practicing, she would bandage them and tell me to try again. When I wanted to quit, she would remind me that my brother's guitar had found its way to me for a reason." As weeks turned into months, something miraculous began to happen. Not only was Julio learning to play guitar, but he was also beginning to regain feeling in his legs. The doctors couldn't explain it, Whether it was the physical therapy, the passage of time, or simply the will to live that music had awakened in him. Ela knew the truth. Music didn't just heal his body, she said. It healed his soul. And when your soul is healed, your body follows. By spring 1964, Julio was not only walking again, but had written his first song. It was a simple ballad about loss, hope, and the angel who had saved him. He called it Ela, though he would later change the title to protect her privacy. The song was about more than gratitude, it was about love. During those long months of recovery, Julio had fallen deeply in love with his nurse. She had seen him at his lowest point and loved him anyway. She had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. She had given him not just music, but a reason to live. I loved her completely, Julio confessed in his autobiography. She was my first love, my deepest love, and in many ways, my only true love. Everything that came after was just an echo of what I felt for Ela. But their love story was complicated by the realities of 1960s Spain. Ela came from a working-class family, while Julio's family had social aspirations. She was 4 years older, already considered an old maid by the standards of the time. Most importantly, she was the nurse who had cared for him during his most vulnerable period. A relationship that society viewed as inappropriate. The pressure from Julio's family was intense. His father, Dr. Julio Iglesias Sr., was a respected gynecologist who had political ambitions. The idea of his son marrying a nurse was unthinkable. You can be grateful to her without ruining your life, his father told him. She did her job. Now you must do yours. Ela herself was conflicted. She loved Julio deeply, but she also understood the social barriers between them. I was just a nurse from a poor family, she said. He was destined for greatness. I couldn't be the anchor that held him back. The decision to separate was mutual, but heartbreaking. In the summer of 1964, as Julio prepared to leave the hospital and begin his new life as a musician, Ela made the ultimate sacrifice. She requested a transfer to another hospital, knowing that seeing him would make it impossible for both of them to move forward. Their final conversation took place in the hospital garden, where Ela had first encouraged Julio to play guitar. "Promise me you'll use the gift music has given you," she told him. "Promise me you'll bring joy to the world the way you've brought joy to me." Julio promised, though his heart was breaking. "I'll carry you with me in every song," he told her. "Every time I sing about love, I'll be singing about you." They never saw each other again. Julio's career took off, almost immediately after leaving the hospital. His first album, released in 1969, included the song he had written for Ela, now titled Gwendoline, to protect her identity. The song became a massive hit across Spain and Latin America, launching Julio's career as an international superstar. But success came with a price. As Julio's fame grew, so did the distance between him and the simple, pure love he had experienced with Ela. His subsequent relationships, including his marriage to socialite Isabel Preisler, were complicated by fame, fortune, and the impossible standard set by his first love. "Every woman I met was compared to Ela," Julio admitted, "and every one fell short. Not because they weren't wonderful, but because what Ela and I had was born from the purest circumstances. She loved me when I had nothing, when I was nothing. That kind of love is irreplaceable." Meanwhile, Ela continued her work as a nurse, following Julio's career from afar, but never seeking to capitalize on their connection. She married a fellow healthcare worker in 1968 and had 2 children, living a quiet life dedicated to helping others. "I would hear his songs on the radio and smile," she said. "I could hear echoes of our conversations in his lyrics, memories of our time together in his melodies. It made me proud to know that I had played a small part in bringing that beauty into the world. The truth about Ella's role in Julio's life remained hidden for decades. Julio protected her privacy fiercely, never revealing her real name or the full extent of their relationship. It wasn't until the 1990s, when a Spanish journalist began investigating the origins of Gwendolyn, that Ella's story began to emerge. The revelation shocked the music world. Here was the woman who had not only saved Julio Iglesias's life, but had essentially created the romantic ballad genre that would dominate Latin music for decades. Every love song Julio sang, every romantic melody that made women swoon across the globe, could be traced back to those tender moments in a Madrid hospital room. She didn't just inspire one song. Music historian Dr. Carmen Martinez explains. She inspired an entire musical philosophy. Julio's approach to love songs, tender, vulnerable, deeply emotional, was born from his relationship with Ella. She taught him that true love requires sacrifice, and that lesson informed every romantic ballad he ever wrote. The impact extended far beyond Julio's own career. His style influenced an entire generation of Latin singers, from Luis Miguel to Alejandro Sanz. The romantic ballad tradition that dominates Latin music today can be traced directly back to the songs Julio wrote while thinking of Ella. In 1998, 34 years after their separation, fate brought them together again. Ella's daughter was getting married, and the wedding planner, unaware of the connection, suggested hiring Julio Iglesias to perform. When Ella learned of the proposal, she initially refused, but her daughter convinced her. Ella, now a grandmother with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes, wept openly as she heard their song performed live for the first time. After the performance, they spoke privately for hours, catching up on decades of separate lives. She was still the same woman who had saved me, Julio said later. Older, wiser, but with the same kind heart and gentle spirit that had pulled me back from the brink. Ella was equally moved by the reunion. He had become everything I knew he could be, she said. But underneath all the fame and success, he was still the broken boy I had fallen in love with. That vulnerability never left him, and it's what made his music so powerful. The meeting provided closure for both of them. They had each lived full lives, loved other people, raised families, and found happiness in their own ways. But they also acknowledged that their brief time together had been the defining love of both their lives. We were each other's great love, Ayla reflected. Not because we were together the longest, but because we were together when it mattered most. I loved him when he was broken, and he loved me when I was nobody special. That kind of love doesn't come along twice. Julio agreed. Ella taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect, he said. It's about finding someone who sees your imperfections and loves you anyway. Every song I've ever sung about love has been an attempt to recapture what she gave me in that hospital room. The story of Julio and Ella challenges our understanding of how music history is made. We often focus on the artists, the producers, the record labels, but sometimes the most important figure is someone whose name never appears on an album cover. Ella Magdaleno, a nurse from Madrid, never sought fame or recognition for her role in creating one of music's greatest love stories. She simply did what nurses do. She cared for someone who was suffering. But in doing so, she unleashed a musical legacy that has touched millions of lives around the world. Today, when Julio Iglesias performs Gwendolyn or any of his romantic ballads, he's not just singing about love, he's singing about the transformative power of human kindness. He's honoring the memory of a woman who saw potential in a broken young man and loved him back to life. Music saved me, Julio has said countless times throughout his career. But the truth is more complex and more beautiful. Ella saved him, and music was simply the vehicle she used to do it. The hospital room where their love story began has since been converted into a storage closet. The guitar that Ela brought to Julio was returned to her family after her brother's death and now sits in a place of honor in her living room. But the songs that were born from their love continue to play around the world, carrying their story to new generations of listeners. In the end, Ella Magdaleno did exactly what she promised to do in that hospital garden in 1964. She helped Julio bring joy to the world, and in doing so, she proved that sometimes the most profound acts of love are also the most selfless. Loving someone enough to let them go, and trusting that the love you've given them will echo through everything they do for the rest of their lives. The nurse who changed music history never asked for credit, never sought recognition, never demanded anything in return for the gift she gave. She simply loved a broken young man back to life, and in doing so, gave the world the voice of Julio Iglesias.